Platoon, Wall Street, Born on the 4th of July, JFK. Oliver Stone's vision has changed the way we saw our past. Now he takes a look at where we are and where we're going. And you will be shocked at what he sees.
Hello, welcome to the Damian and Devlin Show, and this is our review of Natural Born Killers, a 1994 film directed by Oliver Stone, starring Woody Harrelson, Juliette Lewis, Tommy Lee Jones, Tom Sizemore, and Robert Downey Jr. This was a movie that came out and became a big box office success, but it also had a lot of controversies too. The movie was considered one of Oliver Stone's groundbreaking movies, but after he did stuff like Platoon, a lot of people were a little bit shocked by this. What made this movie even worse is this movie follows Mickey and Mallory Knox, who are a couple of serial killers, more like mass murderers, like they say in the movie, and they go on a spree where they just start killing people. What made this movie even more controversial is the fact that it also inspired copycat killings, and people couldn't wait to point fingers at this. So this movie has controversy all over. Quentin Tarantino originally wrote the screenplay for this movie, but when Oliver Stone got his hands on it, he decided he wanted to change it up a bit. He only has a story credit now in the thing because Quentin Tarantino stepped away from this. He didn't want to do it. He actually wanted to direct it himself, but he just couldn't afford to do it. Oliver Stone and his team decided to take the movie in a whole new direction, and Quentin Tarantino said, I don't want my name on the writing, and because he was not a fan of this film. In fact, he said he's changed his mind. He said he's hated it, and then he's come around and said he has no bad feelings to Oliver Stone whatsoever for what he did to this movie. Anyhow, this movie has a lot of controversy. Just saying Natural Born Killers probably already has some people already got their hair standing up on end, because this movie was recently picked as like one of the top 10 most controversial movies of all time. I actually picked this movie. Damien has never seen it. This is actually one of my all-time favorite films. I just fell in love with it when I saw it, and every time I watch it, I get more and more from it. But I understand why it gets under people's skin. It's a visual, mind-blowing experience that it's just, you just can't believe what you're seeing half the time. And since this was your first time, this is a good time for you to give your first opinions on what you just saw like minutes ago.
Well, I'd wanted to see this movie for a very long time. I think my mom actually talked about it when I was younger, but this is not one of the ones that she ever showed me. So as he said, this is the first time I've ever actually seen it. And you said it best. I'll never see another movie like this. And I didn't quite know what Devlin meant at the time when he said that. But now that I've seen it, I know for a fact I'll never see another movie like this. It's very, very interesting. It's unique and one of a kind, basically. I've seen hundreds, if not thousands, of movies, and I've never seen anything like Natural Born Killers. I was almost spoiled on it completely not too long ago, actually, when I was at work. Somebody asked me if I'd seen Woody Harrelson in one of his most, in their words, he said his best role, Natural Born Killers, because, and I said, I'm not going to tell you why, but I want you to just stop talking because I'm gonna see it soon. I'm not gonna say anything more, but don't talk to me anymore about it. So almost got spoiled. I'm glad that it didn't, because I do believe that this is something that just has to be experienced firsthand. Because if I had been told anything about this movie, and he is very good about not telling any kind of secrets at all when it comes to movies. He wants people to experience movies as they should be experienced for the very first time, like without any knowledge going into it. And I agree, I like that kind of feeling. So I'm glad that I had no knowledge about it. I know that it was very controversial. I'd heard about it over the years. And I am actually glad that I did get a chance to see it.
You know, it's funny because when I first chose this and we planned it a while ago, I said, oh, Damien's going to love this movie. And as we were getting closer to the thing, I started remembering stuff in the movie, and I said, you know what? I can't wait to see his opinion, because now that I think about it, I don't think he's seen anything quite like this. I know we've seen dark movies before, the closest things I could compare this to, and not even close, but like Fight Club or a Donnie Darko, where it has a really dark theme in it. But Natural Born Killers takes it to a further way. So I'm glad they didn't spoil it for you, because this is something you really should experience, and you have to be in the right head for it.
Oh, yeah.
So
yeah. I'm glad I was in a happy mood when I came to watch this movie. I still am in a good mood. Like, it did not ruin my mood at all. But if you're in a dark place, like, definitely avoid this movie. Avoid it, please. Especially if, like, you're feeling like thoughts like you want to hurt yourself or hurt others. Don't watch this movie. Just take that as our warning, like a trigger warning, I guess, for you. Just don't watch this movie if you're in that kind of a dark place. Be kind of like in company of good friends, or like in a good peppy mood. It's nice and bright outside. The birds are singing. But yeah, don't watch this movie when you're in a dark place.
Before we get to our positives, I just want to say that this movie isn't just about killing. This is actually kind of a comedic satire. It's played really large. But it also mixes animation, it mixes visuals. That there's so many edits in this movie. This has got to be one of the movies that has so many edits, like just weird things, like them clicking a TV clicker and the window is actually changing the channel to Stranger Things that are coming on the thing. It's like a very interesting thing, and it's just weird, and it's just toxic and beautiful and just strange. And but it is a satire, and I think if you go into that a little bit with that, you need to know that, because it's not just a movie being exploitive, in my opinion. I think everything they do in here has a reason, but I don't want to get into it, but there's so much thing. Why don't you start? Do you have any positives about Natural Born Killers?
I do have a lot of positives. So going off of what I mentioned, like, I'll never watch another movie like this, and it's just because it messes with your mind. The imagery, it's almost distracting in a way, but it's done in such a way that it kind of keeps you watching. You want to know what else they're going to do with the visuals, whether it's the change of colors, because the movie constantly flicks from black and white to full color. Then there's also like sepia tones that are thrown on there. There's one sequence of the movie where it's filmed entirely in green, and like just random effects that are thrown in there. I literally felt like I was on drugs, and I've never done any drugs ever in my entire life. But if I were to do drugs, this is my mental image of being on a drug trip. Like, that's what I felt at the time.
It's like a nightmare.
It is kind of like a nightmare. And then there's just so much imagery going on. And it's, at first I found it kind of distracting and confusing. But as the movie went on, I understood what that imagery represented. It's not necessarily, supposed to be there just for shock value. Mm-hmm. You're seeing into the characters' minds, and these images are flashing to them as if like they're having these brief psychotic flashbacks to like traumatic events in their lives. And so everything has a purpose in this movie, and I learned that as I went on. So if this is your first time going into this movie and you haven't seen it before, give it a chance. Give it some time, because you will then start to realize, okay, no, I'm starting to get it now. I did like the story a lot. Another neat kind of fact about me, and I know I am not the only one out there that shares this kind of opinion, but I'm kind of really intrigued when it comes to serial killers, mass murderers, spree killers, things like that. I find them really interesting. On the level of not like I idolize them or think what they did was great, but what makes them do what they did and things like that. And that's why, I guess, why A&E has those like Portrait of a Serial Killer, and like My Friend Dahmer has just recently come out and it's popular as hell. So I know I'm not the only one out there that finds serial killers and all these kinds of people interesting. And that's kind of what I found with watching Woody Harrelson as what's his name?
Mickey Knox.
Mickey Knox, and then
Juliette Lewis as Mallory Knox.
Juliette Lewis, so the Knoxes. I found myself wanting to know more about them, and even though they are the villains of the movie, the way that it's filmed, it's like they're the protagonists of the movie. And I found myself literally rooting for them. I wanted them to get away at times and things like that. So that to me just shows that it's written really well. Because yes, these people are bad and they have done terrible things, but at the same time, you want to know more about them. You fear for their safety, even though they definitely would not fear for yours. But you fear for theirs. And I guess maybe that's another like kind of critique on how the human mind works. But that could be an like hour-long review, and we're not going to get into that. So I love the script. It was very engaging all the way through. I love the characters. So the Knoxes, I didn't really like Mallory too much. I found her kind of annoying at times. And I kind of wish that there weren't scenes, but definitely Woody Harrelson as Mickey. Oh my gosh, I'm going to have to agree with you. I think this is the best role I've ever seen Woody Harrelson in. Up until recently, I'd seen him in season 1 of True Detective, and that had turned into my favorite role he'd ever done. But this now is definitely my favorite role that he's done. He did an amazing job. And then Robert Downey Jr. showed up out of nowhere. Now, I know he was big in, like you said, he was big in like the 80s, late 80s.
Yeah, he was like a teen star in the 80s.
Before he kind of dropped off the face of the earth due to personal problems, but he kind of shows up, and he puts on this Australian accent, and he does a pretty good job of it, in my opinion, anyway. So I thought, he's pretty cool. I liked him. He was funny. So I loved that performance. Tommy Lee Jones as well. I liked his performance, although I did find he was a little
twirling the mustache.
Too zany at times.
Yeah.
He was spitting a lot when he yelled and things like that. But overall, he did a pretty good job. I love the cinematography of it. The soundtrack was pretty great, especially the ending credit song. I found myself tapping my foot to it and things like that. All of that was pretty amazing. Just the psychedelic trip I feel like I'm still riding the wave on cannot be expressed in words. You have to have that feeling inside you in order to truly grasp what I'm saying. So overall, I would say there are a lot of good things about this movie.
When I get my positives, I tend to notice that I start with directors, and Oliver Stone has to be commended on this. I'm a hit and miss with Oliver Stone because I do know he tends to like to get his personal view in it. Something like JFK or something like that. But I love movies like Platoon and The Doors, and Natural Born Killers is my favorite because he's trying to make us. He's making what's the word I'm looking for? He's trying to make a sentence about society.
A commentary?
And commentary, yes. Social commentary about social media and how we glorify evil things. And
I just literally explained this. My interest in serial killers.
Absolutely. And they play it up to the hilt. But they also play it up. This movie was done over 20 years ago, and they didn't even realize how far that was even going to go even further. So kudos to that. Little imagery of how, like, as you said, it goes back to black and white, to color. You think you get it figured out. And it is. When you first see this, it's overwhelming. To the point that you're right. You made a great point. Stick with this, because what happens is eventually you start going along with the ride, and it's a scary ride, but you want to see the twists and turns. You start thinking that whenever they go black and white, that's the real feelings that they have in their head. So you'll see somebody being sincere, and then you'll see a black and white picture of them like giving a wicked smile. But then you realize that they throw in like color flashbacks, and there's no way of predicting this movie. They do some things that are quite controversial, and he takes chances on this. One of the people you didn't mention, Rodney Dangerfield, who's a very famous comedian. They actually got him to play this really abusive father, and they actually let him write his own dialogue for it, because they just wanted this likable comedian to just be the biggest dirtbag ever. And he was okay with it. Like, he never did a role like this, and it's just, they do the backstory of Mallory as it's a TV sitcom, and they deal with some very delicate situations with a laugh track, or like Happy Days, when we meet Woody Harrelson's character, the audience is like, woo, yeah, this is the guy we're voting for. It's unnerving, but you see what they're doing. It's like, he takes some big chances. So kudos to Oliver Stone on this one of my favorite things. Trent Reznor was the producer of the soundtrack. This is one of my favorite soundtracks. And there are a couple of new songs from Nine Inch Nails. I think Burn was written for this.
I thought I heard some of these songs before. I just couldn't put my nail on it.
Right. And when they talked about actually composing like a score, and Trent Reznor was the one who kind of came up with the idea that since this movie is about social media and pop culture, that what we should do is actually, instead of having like a score, let's just meld classical music, old, songs, some new stuff in there, and it basically, you don't have a score. The score is all like actual songs. Sometimes they even really screw your mind up by playing songs on top of each other. So you're hearing some, Mozart thing, and there's like some, Patsy Cline song playing, or some old 50s song. It's really awesome. And one thing I gotta give kudos to, I was going through a Leonard Cohen phase, and he's the one who did the song at the end. Okay. The song at the end is called The Future, and he actually has a couple songs through this, and he started hitting some soundtracks at this time, and I became a huge Leonard Cohen fan at this time. And, when I was growing up, I always thought, he's that guy who's more like a poet rather than a singer.
He doesn't sing, he just talks.
Yeah, he just, like he even said, he won the Juno for Best Singer, and he goes, really? He goes, yeah, songwriter I could see, but when he won that the one year, he was like, okay, sure. But you know what? His voice is just so perfect for his lyrics, and you get a lot of Leonard Cohen in this, and it's just great. If you get a chance to hear the actual soundtrack, it's phenomenal. It's just changes up the pace all the time. You said all the acting is incredible. Like, most of it is pretty good.
Except for Tommy Lee Jones at some points.
Now, Woody Harrelson, I think this is one of his best performances. And keep in mind, this is one of his earliest performances. He was actually still on Cheers when he did this movie. And a lot of people said, what? You're going to get that innocent Woody guy from Cheers to play a serial killer? But what a lot of people didn't know is that Woody Harrelson's real-life father is serving a term for manslaughter in prison.
I did not know that.
And he channeled that in a lot of ways. Wow. And you know what? Woody Harrelson has now become one of our biggest actors. And whether he's doing something like Zombieland or 3 Billboards in Ebbing, he always brings his A game. And this movie really, I do believe it's one of his best performances.
It definitely shows you how diverse he could be too, because he can go from Zombieland, where he's just literally looking for a Twinkie and being hilarious, Cheers, where he's innocent and still funny, and then just this manifestation of literally pure evil. Like, I've seen him as a grizzled retired detective, things like that. Like, he's so adaptable, and I cannot sing his praises enough.
And just one more shout out, Juliette Lewis. I know, I agree with you. She can be very hard to grab onto at times, because she will be sweet, and it'll be a fake sweet, and then you're like trying to find her. But I'm going to give her a plus on this, because I think that character is supposed to be so screwed up. Like, one minute, I don't know if they're playing her like she's got some mental disorders. Obviously, you see from her past.
She's got to have some.
Right. But what I think works about this is that because she's just, you don't know, like, you look at her and you see this sweet looking girl, and then you just, as you get to know her, she gets even more crazy and stuff. I think it works for the Mickey Knox character, because you realize, is Woody Harrelson like the North Compass that we have to follow?
He's the sane one?
He's the voice of reason in this movie. I actually like to think of this movie, although you do follow Mickey and Mallory, and you're kind of like, ooh, we shouldn't be rooting for them.
We shouldn't be, no.
This is one of those rare movies where I don't think there's a good character in it, but there's complex characters. Even when you meet the cops, they have secret shady pasts and are just as, and I think again that's Oliver Stone saying everybody's screwed up, and this movie isn't going to hold back. The only people we ever see that might be good are the victims, but I have a feeling if they had a longer cut, you'd find out those victims probably had some things that they regret too.
You're probably right.
But anyhow, your negatives.
So, right off the bat, like, I'm not the violence is fine. I'm good with violence. Violence does not bother me enough. as well. It adds to his point about the whole social commentary. We glorify violence. You know what? I was raised in that kind of environment. I'm not even going to try to deny it. We are very desensitized to violence in this day and age. That's not a big deal to me. There was a brief moment where it was a complete shocker to me. I had no idea this was going to happen. I'm not going to spoil it for you, but let me just say that there's some sexual violence involved in a motel room, and that completely shocked me. Like I said, I did not see it coming at all.
Yeah.
And he even said that when he first saw that scene, he was like, "What?
Yeah.
What?" So it bothered me. That stuff always bothers me. Thankfully, it wasn't gratuitous, like I know some movies can be. So thank you for that, not being gratuitous, because that would have really turned me off of this movie. Overall, Rodney Dangerfield, the reason I didn't bring him up is because he really bothered me in this role.
Mm-hmm.
It's a very controversial kind of backstory to it, and it just made me feel uncomfortable. Not to say anything against his acting skills or anything, but just because he did it so well, it kind of scared me that he did it so well. And now you said he wrote his own dialogue. That frightens me even more about the role. It's disturbing. It's uncomfortable. There's something implied about a pregnancy and things like that. And it just made me kind of sick. And I don't like that kind of stuff. So that's definitely a negative here as well.
Yeah.
I do like Rodney Dangerfield, just for the record. I think he's a very funny guy. As well, some of the imagery I felt was a little zany. Like you see faces like doing weird smiles and whatnot at random points.
Covered in blood, yeah.
The covered in blood stuff I thought was cool imagery. Like,
Yeah.
don't get me wrong, but it's just like some wacky stuff is thrown in there. And like I said, I understood it as we went along, but still, at the very beginning of the movie, it's distracting. Definitely give it a chance and stick through with it. But if I didn't have the mental fortitude and I didn't want to do this for your benefit, I probably would not have continued with it, especially when it got to that sexual violence. So again, if you're triggered by that, don't watch this movie, because there is a brief moment of it, as well as I would say a couple of them,
Yeah.
that it's implied as well. But like I said, it's not gratuitous. It is not gratuitous. So there's that going for it. I didn't really like Tommy Lee Jones's character. So like I said, he's a positive, because at certain times his character, I was like, I've seen this person in real life. Like, I've seen this person in real life. But then when things start to get hairy, he goes all like Wile E. Coyote, I'm gonna get you, blah, varmint, like you like to yell out all the time. So that just, it made me realize, like, yes, I'm watching a satire, but he just, I don't know, it brought me out of it a little bit with his character. I did like the end of the movie very much, but there was kind of a plot hole there. I guess maybe I might have missed it when they were explaining the end, but a character kind of goes missing that helps both the Knoxes. And
we'll talk about it after.
Oh yeah, we'll talk about it after.
In case I remember really, but
I don't know what happened to this character. He kind of just disappears off the face of the earth. So that was a plot hole for me, and I was kind of thinking, like, all the way to the end credits, I was like, where did he go? Where did he go? Where did he go?
We'll talk.
We will talk, but...
In case I saw it.
And you know what? If you want to approach me in the streets or anything like that, it's like, hey, you're that famous YouTuber guy. I'm not actually famous, but, if you want to make me feel good, then we can talk about it too. But that just brought me out of it as well. So overall, those are my negatives. I would have to say the positives outweigh the negatives here, but some of the negatives are really hard to stomach.
And as I said, this is one of my favorite movies, so I don't have a lot of negatives, but I have a couple. But they're not negatives from my point of view, but they are negatives for anybody watching. I'm going to continue a little bit with if you're unnerved by any kind of like sexual violence and stuff like that, I just want to say that when they play it up like a sitcom and there's some really disturbing things, I think if you are in the wrong state of mind, this is not a good thing to watch. This is a satire. The reason he plays it up as a sitcom, like something like a Family Ties or a Happy Days, he plays it up that way because he's trying to show that society tries to not see it. So what he does is that he blatantly shows it and puts a laugh track to it to say, now you can't hide your eyes. This is stuff that's happening in people's homes, but you don't see it on TV every day. So I think it was a bold choice, but yes, I'm going to call that a negative. So if you have issues with that, I certainly have some history having to do with that, but I'm okay with it at certain times. And this movie, I get what he's doing, but just be cautious. If that does bother you, that could be taken the wrong way. My only other negative is, it's really not a negative on the movie, but I'm surprised at Quentin Tarantino's stance on this movie, and I respect that he has this stance. But he has said that he thinks that this movie kind of glorifies violence in a lot of ways. But what I want to say is that I love Quentin Tarantino's movies, but I think his movies actually promote violence more and glorify it. Movies like Pulp Fiction and Reservoir Dogs are brilliant, but they don't show how it affects people and stuff. They almost say, wasn't that a cool death kind of thing? I never got that from Natural Born Killers. Whenever they showed a violent death, you seem to be disturbed by all the death by it. And so I'm actually really surprised that he kind of had that feeling when it first came out, because I think that this movie actually succeeds where sometimes his movies don't. I think sometimes people go in like, woohoo, you know, violence, violence. Natural Born Killers, I think it celebrates it in more of a cartoonish way, and I think it gets the job done. So that's just a negative that, you know, I'm glad he felt, you know, I'll just take a story credit because they changed it so much, so I respect him for that. But I just want to say that I think Oliver Stone actually succeeded in not glorifying violence more than Mr. Tarantino, and I do love his movies. So that's all I really have to say on it.
You know what, thinking about it, all the positives that I do love about this movie, Woody Harrelson's performance being topmost, and you know, just the fact that it's such a unique movie, I do have to counterbalance it with the negatives that I did talk about, because they are very disturbing and difficult, as well as, of course, yes, the glorification of violence, the glorification that we turn these serial killers and mass murderers into icons. Like, you never hear about their victims. You always hear about the killers. And I think that's the wrong way that we go about it. Because of that counterbalance, I have to give this movie a 3. I'm giving it a 3. It's a good movie, but it's hard to get through at points.
My last thing before I give my point is this movie became notorious even after its box office run, because this movie was pointed at for a lot of copycat crimes. This is a movie that even came up in court for the Columbine shootings and stuff. And I just want to say that I don't personally blame media for that kind of stuff. Only because it takes people who have had a long development of issues to do that kind of thing. Mm-hmm. I remember when Columbine happened, they actually found Marilyn Manson discs and started blaming Marilyn Manson. Those people could have had discs of like Anne Murray or Air Supply, but because they just saw Marilyn Manson, and I am sad that there are copycat killings to this movie, but I don't particularly blame movies. Yes, somebody who may be a little unstable watches a movie, but I don't think somebody who watches this movie just says, I'm going to start killing people. I was obsessed with this movie. I didn't go out and hurt people. And so I personally think when media and that is, you know, tries to cash in on it, that's exactly what this movie's saying. And the fact that people try to blame this movie, maybe they should actually watch the movie, because it's saying, no, media has a lot more to do with that. How you grow up is what creates you. Anyhow, on that, yeah, I'm giving it a 5. Whenever you hear me say one of my favorite movies, kind of expect it. I love this movie. This was one of the few movies I've ever came out of saying, I'd like to direct a movie someday. I don't know if that'll ever happen, but I've never seen a movie. This is probably the first movie that I really realized that the director is a star. As in, his presence is felt in almost every scene of this movie, whether he's sticking stock footage in or making bold choices. And, you know, I don't like all of Oliver Stone's stuff, but I think when he is in that zone, he gets it. And Natural Born Killers, for me, he gets it.
He definitely does, just like we get you. So thank you for being on this journey with us. We definitely would never do anything to harm you. In fact, we want to make you happy. So make us happy by subscribing, commenting. Have you seen it? Did you like it? Do you have any apprehensions about it, let us know. We'd love to talk to you about it. As well, follow us on social media, Facebook, Twitter, things like that. We always love to have you along every single day of the week. So thank you so much again, and I hope to see you, along with him, next time.
Natural-born killers. In the media circus of life, they were the main attraction.